Okay, we're going to start. I thank all of you for coming and braving this weather.
Thank you.
I'm Howard Stein. I'm trying to fill in for our illustrious leader who's in California, Chuck Newman. We usually introduce him as the founder of our organization. And so welcome to yet another meeting, which have been pretty much monthly, of the protectors of equality in government. Part of our function, along with the action circles, is to play some role in education around our general thematic focal points of the organization. And basically, we've had a series of speakers up to now. Our general mission is to assure that our government will treat all Americans with equality and acceptance. We believe that every citizen's vote is their equal weight, and that all citizens should have unimpeded access to voting. We believe that there must be laws that protect all citizens from harassment and discrimination, and that these laws must be applied and enforced equally. We believe that race, religion, national origin, gender, identity, sexual preference, geographic location, political affiliation, age, skin color, or physical ability cannot be the basis for any discrimination in legislation or any government-run or government-supported service or agency. Now, we've had a series of governments, in reaction to the elections in November, a series of speakers on various topics that are related to this broad thematic focal point of the organization. Wonderful speakers on gerrymandering from the Michigan League of Women's Voters. We've had wonderful speakers talking about the issue of freedom of the press from Birch, a wonderful organization here in Michigan, looking at issues associated with the ACLU and the basic battle in the courts to maintain these rights which are under attack. And also from the Michigan League of Conservation Voters, focusing on the issue of environmental justice. Basically, we have today another speaker and another topic linked to the broad focal point of this organization. I would like to indicate that our next speaker is set up for the 25th of June, back here in this wonderful place. It's nice that my taxes have gone to a greater purpose, and I want to get some return on my local taxation. So this is a great home to be built. And the first time I've had the opportunity as a citizen of Pittsfield Township to enjoy it. But on the 25th of June, we have basically Washington County Sheriff Clayton speaking on the issue of immigration-related enforcement issues in Washington County. He's, of course, nationally recognized for his contributions in the area. Briefings in Washington on this issue. And the meeting will be held here at 3 p.m. on the 25th of June. Hope you all will be able to attend. Now, one of the other things that we focus on is the issue of action circles. And we'll be meetings following this of the action circles, focusing on the issues of the ACLU, gerrymandering, redistricting, voting rights and fair elections, Planned Parenthood, freedom of the press, immigration rights, and the Southern Poverty Land Center environmental issues. Linda Levy will be handling it afterwards, organizing the groups, and so we'll hand the mic over there. But let's continue now with the main focus of our meeting today, which is our speaker, Imam Mustapha Elturk, who came here to the United States in 1976. I'm also an immigrant and only arrived around the same time as well. And he came at the start of the Civil War in Lebanon to continue his higher education. He has a Bachelor of Science in mathematics. Became more religious in his orientation, working under the scholar and Islamic thinker, Dr. Ahmad from Pakistan. He had joined the Islamic organization North America and in IONA in 1995, and he's currently the president and Imam. It's really been great. We're able to get him. He speaks very widely. He's came back from Canada. He's heavily involved with activism here in the Detroit area, and he serves on the executive board of directors as treasurer of the Interfaith Leadership Council of Metropolitan Detroit. He also serves on the Interfaith Center for Racial Justice, co-chairs the Imam's Council of Michigan, Muslim Community Council, married with 5 children living in Troy, Michigan. Imam, it's great to have you. Today he's going to talk to us about Islamophobia, the real threat. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Howard, for this introduction, and let me greet all of you. The greeting of peace. This is our greeting, the Islamic greeting, Assalamu alaikum, which means peace be with you. So, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this session of Islamophobia, the real threat. It's really a pleasure for me to be with you and share with you this very important presentation now that we are living for real under the Trump administration with so much heightened Islamophobia, if you know what I mean, hate and bigotry, etc. I think there can be no other time better than this time to come together and really learn about supposedly the diversity that make up America and how we can safeguard our constitutional rights for, maintaining this diversity of all people from all walks of life. So I'm going to begin with the introduction about what Islamophobia is. Of course, as you know, Islamophobia is made up of 2 basically words, Islam and phobia. Islam is the faith of, or the religion of 1.7 billion Muslims around the world, and phobia means fear, means horror. As a term, Islamophobia means prejudice against, hatred towards, or fear of Muslims or groups perceived to be Muslim. It also means intolerance, bigotry, and unfairness. Islamophobia connotes a social anxiety about Islam and Muslims. It is a social stigma towards not only Muslims, but the faith they represent, and that is namely fear. It is sad and unfortunate that we in this day and age have to go through this social anxiety. And some scholars define Islamophobia as anti-Muslim racism and is a continuation of the anti-Asian, anti-Arab racism that has existed literally for decades. You've probably seen in cartoons and some other clips how they depict Arabs with harem and big noses and camels. And so it's the same stigma that has been around for a long time. It is the same racism, actually, that existed against the Roman Catholics and the Jews, anti-Semitism back in the 30s. Islamophobia is not only targeting Muslims, but the faith they claim, and that is Islam. And it is very common nowadays to hear statements such as Islamic terrorism. You've heard that many times, particularly if you watch Fox News. This is how they define terrorists who happen to be Muslims. They lump everybody and the faith into terrorism. So they use this rhetoric of Islamic terrorism, which really what it means is Islam, the faith itself, is terrorism. For example, Donald Trump inauguration, the president vows to eradicate radical Islamic terrorism in his first address to the nation. President Obama had refrained from using this because he's a man who is educated and he understands and he knows that Islam is not terrorism, although maybe somebody in his administration would have loved for Obama to use that term, but Obama was wise to refrain from using such terms. So what happens? These subliminal messages are really creating rage and anger in the hearts of ignorant people. And in some cases, that rage and anger and fear that they create in their hearts lead to murder and loss of lives. And you probably saw on television mosques being burnt, particularly Muslim sisters attacked because of her hijab, and so on and so forth. It is indeed evil. A case in point, these 3 young students from North Carolina, which I happen to have met their father. I go to North Carolina where they worship in Raleigh. And these 3 young students who attend University of North Carolina, UNC, were murdered in cold blood simply because they are Muslims. So you can see the effect of Islamophobia and the fabrication of lies and the anger and rage that is produced in such people like Craig Hicks, who murdered them in cold blood. The gentleman in this picture, Dia Barakat, he was only 23 when he was murdered, a second-year student in the School of Dentistry. He wanted to become a dentist. He would go to Syria to help, those who needs help. And his wife, also, she was attending UNC to become a dentist, and her sister also was about to become whatever field she wanted. But the two, the husband and wife, they were pursuing a dentistry program, and they were murdered in cold blood by Craig Hicks. Islamophobia is simply a violation of human rights. Anti-Muslim hostility is seen as natural and normal. We've been hearing about this since 9/11, but actually it started way before 9/11. But it has become the norm. Every time you tune into Fox News or CNN for that matter, this has become the norm. Among the things hate mongers teach is that Islam is inferior to the West. Well, we shall see in few slides. Is Islam really inferior to the West? Islam is barbaric, irrational, primitive, and sexist. These are the claims of the Islamophobes. Islam is violent, aggressive, and threatening. Muslims are portrayed as the other, not part and parcel of the larger community, but the other. Now, in spite of Muslims' contributions made to this country, from building the farms by the Muslim slaves, to the industries, to the manufacturing of automobiles, the Yemenis who came from Yemen, and also to serving in the medical field. How many of you here have Muslim doctors? Anybody? Show of hand. Maybe some. And every field one can imagine, engineering and so on and so forth. Muslims are not considered as part and parcel of the larger American society. So there's this stigma about Islam and Muslims. But here's the funny part. There's this article that says all terrorists are Muslims except the 94% that aren't. And I find this to be really very funny. But where did they get the 6%? They got the 6% from this chart. On the FBI's website, you will see this chart. There exists a chronological list of all terrorist attacks committed on U.S. soil between 1980 and 2005. And if you look at the pie next to the yellow sector or pie, you'll find Islamic extremists 6% of all the terrorism that have occurred on U.S. soil. Yet Americans continue to live in mortal fear of radical Islam, a fear propagated and inflamed by right-wing Islamophobes. Research shows that the U.S. identified more than 160 Muslim American terrorist suspects and perpetrators in the decade since 9/11. So what does that tell us? This is just a fraction, just a percentage of the thousands of acts of violence that occur in the United States each year. In Europe, you'll be surprised too, because you hear all these bombings that are happening in Europe, in France, and in Belgium, and everywhere in Europe. Yet data shows that less than 1% of terrorist attacks are happening in Europe by Muslims. They inflate things beyond one's imagination. Now, do you know what is happening in Central African Republic? Anybody knows what is going on there? No, of course. You know why? Because Fox News don't mention that. CNN don't want to talk about that. But consider this. Christian militias in Central Africa or African Republic have carried out ethnic cleansing of the Muslim population during the country's ongoing civil war. This is the truth. Just Google that and read for yourself. Have you heard of what is happening, the ethnic cleansing of Muslims in Burma, Rwanda? Anyone? Maybe some of you? Yes, indeed. The genocide that is being ignored by the international community I don't want to show you pictures of it breaks one's heart. These people who are innocent have done nothing to anybody over there, but they want to rid Rwanda and other places from Muslims. This is bigotry. This is hate. Islamophobia is a widespread European and American phenomenon. Racism, anti-Semitism, and Islamophobia are all fruits of the same tree of hate. We've seen this consistently in our past, and we continue to see that, and this is why those meetings are so important. I don't know when we're going to get over this. I don't know who will be the next victim. It is us now. We're taking the stage. But here's some statistics regarding, the percentages of Islamophobia, for example, around the world, Europe and the United States, let's say. So you find from this chart that of all the European countries mentioned here, Italy, France, Germany, and Britain, and then we have Canada, you find the United States is, by and large, the largest of all these countries in terms of hate and bigotry toward Muslims, at 52%. And then another chart shows of all these religions that exist here in the United States, the Protestants, Catholic, Jewish, even atheists, those who don't have religion for that matter, and Mormons, you will find that the greater percentage in which hate and bigotry is targeted against are Muslims, at about 48%. And this is the fact regarding who among the population are hate mongers. They're not the educated ones like yourselves who want to come and learn and perhaps help, stand shoulder to shoulder with the coalition that we are building everywhere in the United States to stop hate and bigotry. But it is, if you look at this chart, you will find that a great deal of prejudice toward Muslims are from those who are uneducated. 45% high school students have not even gone beyond that in terms of education. And that's the sad part. Now, who are they? Who are the Islamophobes? CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, had conducted this survey and found out that there are 32 outer core organizations and 37 inner core groups that are working together to promote Islamophobia. Now, why would they want to do that? It's a money-making machine for them, aside from just being bigots themselves. Around $120 million in revenue Islamophobia had produced to the 37 inner core groups. 78 bills were designed to vilify Islam, and those bills were introduced in various states around the country. You heard the Sharia bill, right? Thankfully, our governor rejected that, but it was introduced before, and recently it was reintroduced by a new congresswoman, first term actually, and that's sad. So, incitement to violence. Who incite people to commit violence against Muslims? These three are the main culprits: Robert Spencer, Pamela Geller, and David Yerushalmi. Anyone heard of them? Anyone know about them? Some of them? Yeah, they are the biggest bigots and promoters of hate and fear. So, achievements of Islamophobia, what did they achieve? 77 people murdered in Norway. You heard about that a few years ago, right? Breivik, I guess his name was, the murderer who mercilessly slaughtered, so many people, 77 people. Do you know who he was inspired by to commit this atrocity? The ideology of Pamela Geller. More than 100 mosques attacked in the USA, 83 anti-Muslim bills presented in 32 states. And the state of Islamophobia in America. In 2012, CARE rates Islamophobia as a 5.9 on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 presenting an America free of Islamophobia and 10 being the worst possible situation for Muslims. In 2010, CARE rated the state of Islamophobia in America as a 6.4. We are in 2017. I don't have the latest figures, but I can assure you it's in the 7-8% under particularly the Trump administration. What is sad, my dear brothers and sisters, is that clergy such as Pat Robertson would promote such ideology. On his 700 Club program, Robertson, a wealthy televangelist, is known for making comments asserting that Islam is satanic. Islam is satanic. Islam, in which 1.7 billion Muslims across the globe adhere to. Yet he had the audacity to call Islam satanic. Islam is not a religion, and that Muslims are worse than Nazis. Maybe he made a lot of money out of this statement. In response to the Foley beheading video some time ago, if you remember Foley, Foley was beheaded by ISIS. So in that response, Brian Fisher, on his online radio show sponsored by the American Family Association, said, "We need to ban all Muslim immigration because Islam is like the Ebola virus. It's deadly, it's lethal. And all you can do with a virus like that, there's no cure for it. It can only be contained. It has to be stopped. And the way you do it is through quarantine. So perhaps the internment of the Japanese will come back. I don't know. Maybe under this administration, the fate of Muslims will be that of the Japanese back in the days. So I have this question for you. This question was posed by Time Magazine. Is America Islamophobic? That was in 2010. This issue was produced in August of 2010. Before we come back to it, 7 years later, I ask the question now. Is America Islamophobic? Better yet, has America become more Islamophobic? Well, let's hear from General Flynn, who happened to not last more than 20 days as the National Security Advisor under the Trump administration. Here's what he said. We are facing another ism, just like we faced Nazism and fascism and imperialism and communism. Flynn said, this is Islamism. It is a vicious cancer inside the body of 1.7 billion people on the planet, and it has to be excised. Sure. Trump's campaign. The Trump campaign of the promise that he made to ban Muslims from coming into the United States. So he consults Giuliani, Rudy Giuliani, the former mayor of New York, and Giuliani is speaking. He said, Trump asked me how to do a Muslim ban legally. You know how cunning Trump is, right? So he wants to do that. This is the intent. So here's what Giuliani said on Fox News. I'll tell you the whole history of it. When he first announced it, he said, Muslim ban. That's the motive. That's his intent. He called me up. He said, put a commission together. Show me the right way to do it legally. Obviously, because of the First Amendment of freedom of religion, he cannot call it a Muslim ban. And it was on that ground that the federal judges halted the ban on Muslims. And what we did was, Giuliani is saying here, and what we did was we focused on, instead of religion, danger. The areas of the world that create danger for us, which is a factual basis, not a religious basis, perfectly legal, perfectly sensible. And that's how they made it legal. Well, thank God again for the federal judges who halted the travel ban or so-called Muslim ban. Now, Wolfram Richter, a professor of economics at Dortmund University of Technology, here's what he has to say. I am afraid we have not learned from our history. My main fear is that what we did to Jews, we may now do to Muslims. The next Holocaust would be against Muslims. And you see what's happening in the Middle East, not only here. The Muslims are suffering a great deal, here and abroad. And regarding the ban on Sharia, Abraham Foxman, the ADL, Anti-Defamation League's national director, says, people don't know what Sharia means. And literally, people really don't know what Sharia is. Tell them Sharia. What is Sharia? They have no idea literally what Sharia means. It's a foreign word. The proposed anti-Sharia laws are camouflaged bigotry. That's it. And here are some states. The grayish area, there's no legislation. The red states are the ones that passed the legislation supposedly against Sharia. This is an older one. more states were added, and the blue ones are the ones that rejected the legislation. Now, if you Google Sharia, Google knows everything, right? So you Google Sharia, what do you get? Here's what you're going to get. Creeping Sharia, right away. 10 reasons no one should follow Sharia. Women against Sharia. Muslims against Sharia. Why Sharia must be opposed. And they make this hoopla about Sharia as if Sharia is the worst thing that ever happened to humanity. And I say Sharia is the best thing that ever happened to humanity since sliced bread. An expression I used with Sally Howell, professor at U of M, Dearborn history. And she quoted me on that in her book. And I mean it. Because if you don't know what Sharia is, then you don't know. But if you know what Sharia is, and I'm going to prove to you how Sharia and the faith, Islam, and Muhammad, peace be upon him, influenced America in its founding days. Did you know that Prophet Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, is honored by the Supreme Court? Anyone knew this? Nobody knew this. Maybe one or two. Here he is. The United States Supreme Court honored Prophet Muhammad in 1935 among the 18 greatest lawgivers of the world alongside Moses and others. Those were the people who had regards to a great man who had brought about transformation and revolution that revolutionized not only Arabia but the entire world. Michael Hart, in his book, The 100, he studied about hundreds of personalities, and he came up with the most influential 100 personalities, and he places Muhammad on the top of the list of the 100, saying, "My choice of Muhammad may surprise some and may be questioned by others, but he was the only man in history who was supremely successful at both the religious and the secular levels." And you see how America appreciates this man and puts him alongside with 17 or 18 others who are regarded as the best lawgivers ever. Have you been to the Library of Congress? I know some of you have, maybe. I have, but I didn't know about it until later. So I'm excited to go back and look up in the dome. Have you ever, those of you who've been there, have you looked at the dome above? Well, next time you go, please do. Because what you see in the dome right there, you see countries that have influenced the civilizations over time. So America naturally is one of them. We have to boast, right? Egypt is one of them, among so many other countries, Spain, England, so on and so forth. But among all these countries, you find Islam. Can you see it there? How come? They recognize Islam to be, and mind you, all the other names represent countries. Islam is not a country, it's a religion. Islam is the only religion up there that was recognized as a contributors to civilizations. Yet the Islamophobes want to tell us that we are barbaric, Islam is terrorism, and so on and so forth. So we come back to the question that was posed by Time magazine in 2010. Is America Islamophobic? Now, the excerpt from that magazine holds true even today, even more. So here's an excerpt. To be a Muslim in America now is to endure slings and arrows against your faith, not just in the schoolyard and the office, but also outside your place of worship and in the public square, where some of the country's most powerful mainstream religious and political leaders unthinkingly, or worse, deliberately conflate Islam with terrorism and savagery. Now, this conflict has naturally international implications and tarnishes the image of Islam worldwide. Some might even describe our faith as a religion of terrorism, as we had seen earlier, Islamic terrorism. And have you heard of the Countering Violent Extremism? Anybody heard of that? This is a program by the FBI, by the government, to target those violent extremism, the extremists that may be potentially violent and cause harm. So I happened to sit in on a forum of the FBI in DC, and even prior to that, over here when I was consulted about it. I don't like it personally because although it mentions other organizations, but I know that it is targeting the Muslim community. And lo and behold, in this administration, the Countering Violent Extremism is now changing to Countering Islamic Extremism. Bigotry is always wrong and always counterproductive. Muslims are working hard to combat Islamophobia, and we cannot do it alone. We need all the help we can get from people of conscience like yourselves who stand up for justice and speak out against hate, bigotry, racism toward any person or group of people. Doesn't matter, Muslims or any other faith, blacks or Latinos, immigrants or refugees. We need to stand up shoulder to shoulder to fight that hate and bigotry. We should be all united against Islamophobia and against all sorts of phobias. And some of the ways interfaith partners can fight Islamophobia, I'm going to share with you a few ideas here. Number one, for example, in your town, you could go to your city councils or whatever other government organizations and try to pass a resolution equating Islamophobia with racism and anti-Semitism. Demand that. Another solution would be to develop an action plan. I know there's a grouping now after this session to discuss various things, so maybe some of these would help you develop something in your community. But have an action plan to mediate hate, anger, and fear with positive human relationships. We're all human beings, brothers and sisters. I'm a Muslim, maybe some of you are Christians, maybe some of you don't belong to any religion, maybe some of you are Jews, maybe some of you belong to another denominations, but the bottom line is that you and I and all of us, all human beings, belong to one race, and that is the human race. And the essence, this is the greatness and wisdom of God Almighty, who created all of us of different faith traditions, of different skin color, of different languages, from all over the world, to enjoy this diversity, to learn from one another, not that we should despise each other. There's one verse in the Quran that personally, honestly, I really didn't appreciate it. I mean, I appreciate the whole Quran, the Holy Quran, my holy book. But sometimes when you experience something, those verses become, more close to your heart. Like this verse that addresses humanity. The Quran addresses different groups of people in a different way. O believers for Muslims, O Prophet for the Prophet, O people of the book for the Christians and the Jews. But when he wants to address humanity, he will call them and he will address them, O mankind. O mankind, we created you from a single male and a single female, Adam and Eve. And I think science is proving that all of us, we have DNA that is common to our ancestors that goes all the way back to Adam and Eve. So in reality, We are all brothers and sisters. And if this is the case, then we have to honor one another, belonging to one family, the family of Adam and Eve. But the verse continues. It says, and this part of the verse, that we created you from a single male and a single female, there's an underlying interpretation that sometimes we often overlook, and that is, all of you are equal in the sight of God. No one faith should boast and say, my faith is better than your faith, or my religion is better than your religion, or I am white better than you because you're black. No, we're all equal in the sight of God. And the verse continues, it says, and we made you into nations and tribes. What does that mean? It was the will of God that He made us, human beings, in the shape, in the color, in the tongue that we are across the globe. It was His design. It was purposely. God wanted this diversity in creation for a reason. And what is that reason? لِتَعَارَفُوا in Arabic. So you may know one another. So you may come together. So you may appreciate. And this is why I say, this verse I really didn't appreciate it as much as I do, or as I did when I came to the United States, because the United States is the only place in the world that is made up of immigrants. We are a country of immigrants from all over the world. Now, this verse makes perfect sense. And if we can't come together to celebrate the diversity of God and enjoy one another by learning about each other, then we are defeating the very purpose of what God created. So, develop a plan, an action plan to overcome hate and bigotry and fear with a positive human relationships. 3, call for a joint sermon against hate. If you belong to a church or any organized group, religion or otherwise. So for all places of worship against Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, and racism in general. Number 4, perhaps if you don't belong to an interfaith organization, perhaps you can form an interfaith delegation to meet guiding institutions. So interfaith groups must develop relationships with guiding institutions like the media, elected officials, the school system, businesses. These relationships become a critical resource in times of crisis. Number 5, discuss Sharia in your interfaith dialogue groups. There's nothing to fear Sharia. America honored the man who brought Sharia, Muhammad, peace be upon him. So there's no fear. There should not be any fear toward Sharia, because Sharia, like I said, is the best thing since sliced bread if you understand the objectives of Sharia, the preservation of religion, the preservation of the intellect, the preservation of wealth, the preservation of lineage, among other things. Everything we already promote. So this conversation will enhance your knowledge and prepare you for discussions on the topic. Number 6, perhaps you could arrange a panel in a synagogue, church, and a mosque. It is not just interfaith dialogue partners, but lay members should come together and fight, hate, learn more about racism and all that, like we're doing here, really, literally, making groups and discuss how we are going to overcome and fight hate. Number 7, perhaps some of you like to write, publish an article on Islamophobia, and You could request the interfaith partners to publish it in their, blogs, or you could submit that to a newspaper or whatever, editorials and so on and so forth. Certainly, you can promote it in your websites and Facebook pages. 8, when it comes to violence in Scripture, please compare apples to apples. Don't take things out of context, because there are similar passages in the Bible. If taken out of context, then you defeat the purpose. Similarly, to cut and paste from the Quran, about certain violent verses and use them in general, then you are not doing justice to the Quran, the holy book. You need to compare apples to apples. Islamophobia indeed is the real threat today, and I want to thank you all for standing with us, and I want you to know that the Muslim people around your town, around your neighbors, everywhere, love you, don't hate you, they don't want to kill you, as they try to create this fear in you against them. We are one community, we are one people, and together we can overcome hate and bigotry. Thank you so very much for inviting me.
We have a few minutes for any questions, so please stand up, and any comments or questions, please.
All right, I'll take the, yes.
You probably heard Trump's speech today.
No, I haven't, unfortunately. So what did he say? He's in Saudi Arabia, still there, or?
And he was speaking to a large group of Arab leaders.
Correct.
I'd be interested in your reaction to his effort to reach out to Sunni leaders in that part of the world.
Well, that part of the world is the part of the world that created the mess we're in, particularly Saudi Arabia. I don't like to talk politics like that, but at any rate, some of you already know what I'm talking about. But let me tell you one thing. The purpose of Trump is to make a deal with Saudi Arabia and the Sunni leaders over there and sell weapons to them so we can kill more people. And I think they've made a deal of $350 billion to sell weapons and continue the slaughter of people, innocent people in Yemen and other places. That's the ugly side of it. Yes.
First of all, thank you very much for your talk. I found it quite inspirational. But to follow up, you didn't mention Sunnis, you just did from that question, or Shia, or Wahhabism. You didn't mention the potential rifts within Islam, and I wonder if you could
I will address that. Yeah. Thank you for asking this question. Actually, the sects between Sunnis and Shias, or the conflict, if you will, that Muslims are facing today between Sunnis and Shias is not really part of the Islamophobia, if you will, subject. But now that you mentioned it, the ramifications, or rather the nature of the conflict, is more political than it is religious, if you will. I lived in Lebanon. Not most of my life, 1/3 of my life. I'm 62 now. I came here at the age of 21, but I lived enough to know and recognize that there was no such thing as Sunni and Shia. We were all one people. My brother, who is a Sunni, is married to a Shia wife, and we didn't have this sectarian thing. That was created, okay? Perhaps, we don't want to get into the politics and the depth of politics, but this is a new thing, Iran and Saudi Arabia, and it's all political, absolutely 100% political. That's one side of it. The other side of it is, yes, correct. Unfortunately, And sadly, it was we who promoted Wahhabism. You nod in your head, you're agreeing with me. This is when we went to Afghanistan way before to liberate Afghanistan and defeat our enemy, the Soviet Union, by having the Mujahideen. Some of you are old enough to remember the Mujahideen, right? Who later on, Osama bin Laden had joined them, and Osama bin Laden belonged to the Wahhabi sect, and this Wahhabism had spread, like wildfire over there in Afghanistan and throughout other countries, and also in Europe and in America. So it was, we were, believe it or not, printing the Wahhabi literature in Texas and sending it through CIA to Afghanistan to promote that so we can kill our enemy. So there you have it.
Could you possibly speak a bit about why women in the Muslim world, please, have to wear hijab or sometimes burqa?
Okay, very good. No. That's a very good question. Okay, back in the days before Islam came, first of all, wearing the headscarf is nothing new to Islam or Muslims. This tradition has existed with the Christians. Even I came to know in some Orthodox European, Ukrainian, or whatever churches, the sisters still observe, the headscarves when they go to the church. So during the time of Prophet Muhammad, before he became a prophet, during those days, prior to Islam, they had carried out the tradition of wearing scarves. So that wasn't anything new. It was tradition carried out by Abraham, Ishmael, and throughout history. So what Islam introduced is to keep your headscarf, but now instead of having just a headscarf, all the way put in the back, to kind of cover your chest as well, so that you are more modest in front of men and whatever. So there's a commandment in the Quran that requires women to dress in this way. You hear probably sometimes out of ignorance perhaps that, it's a choice. Well, everything is a choice. I have a choice to pray or not to pray. I have to pray 5 times a day. God commanded me to pray 5 times a day as a Muslim. Of course, I have a choice to do it or not do it, but that's between me and God. But to say that, the headscarf and, the dress modestly, actually the dress code that Islam promotes is nothing is shown except the face and the hands, with loose fittings, not see-through, nor tight clothes. And that is to protect your chastity and protect you and be respectful in the community, not to be looked at as otherwise, if you know what I mean. So Islam came to complete, if you know what I mean, those manners and ethics. So that's how it is. Now for the burqa, there's a difference of opinion, or rather the veil. So the beauty about the scarf and the veil and all that is that we're not restricted to follow one tradition like the Saudis who wear totally black. No, as long as you fulfill the requirements, it's okay. You can wear it any which way you like. You can wear it colorful, you can, whatever the case may be, as long as you meet the criteria. So you find in Africa, they wear different, all colorful headscarf and so on and so forth. In Europe, they wear something different. In here, they wear something different. Now, regarding the veil or the burqa, do you know what the burqa is? The burqa something that you put over you, and you have like a screen in front of your eyes to see. Now, that came from an instruction that was given to Prophet Muhammad to instruct his wives to speak to men behind the veil. So at that time, they had literally veil, a curtain between men who would come more often to the wives of the Prophet to inquire about the Prophet. So this legislation was strictly for the wives of the Prophet. Now the scholars of Islam and the jurists after that, they have deduced, so there's a difference of opinion among the scholars. Some say that they should, all women should wear the veil, and others says no, that was specific to the wives. It is sufficient that they just wear, the scarf, and that's it. So for example, you find in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, in India to a certain extent, in Saudi Arabia, in Yemen, they exercise that. They wear the burqa or they wear the veil. And in so many other countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, part of the Middle East, they just wear the scarves. Those who practice it. Not all Muslim women practice it. Some do, some don't. I hope that answers the question.
To expand on that a little bit, does Islam sort of denigrate women as opposed to men? Do women have less rights in general?
Thank you for asking that. I'm going to begin answering this question by an incident that occurred a few years back when my son, he was a special ed student. So I was meeting with his counselor in middle school, and we were waiting for other counselors to come to talk about his situation. So I'm talking to the head counselor. I was just chatting. So she happened to be around my age. And I didn't live here in the 60s, but I lived the 60s back home, the hippie era and all that. I was a fan of, I was a musician. I liked music. I liked all sorts of things. I was following the American bands, European bands. So we were talking about that. And I said, well, tell me, what were some of your demands back in the 60s in the women liberation movement that was so big? She said, one of the demands we wanted was to retain our maiden name. I looked at her, I laughed. I said, you know what? We are 1,400 years ahead of you. Because Islam from the very beginning prohibits women to take the names of their husbands. It's their right to keep their name. There's a verse in the Quran that says, call them to their fathers, not to their husbands. They belong to their fathers, and they have to maintain that lineage. Remember I mentioned in one of the objectives of Sharia is the preservation of lineage. That's one. At the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and I confidently say that Prophet Muhammad was the only and first man who liberated women in the history of mankind. Islam came. By the way, prior to Islam, the tradition in Arabia was, of course, they mistreated women like anything. There was this one clip from a movie that kind of talk about that time, the pre-Islam era. So in the beginning of Islam, some of the believers were persecuted badly, so they fled to Ethiopia, Negus, the Christian king over there, for refuge. So the tribe leaders sent somebody to chase them and bring them back. So they were in the court of the king, and the king wanted to hear both sides. So when they talked about, the Muslims talked about the things that Muhammad brought to them, among the things that he mentioned was women. And this tribe leader who was sent there said, he ridiculed the statement of the Muslim, and he said, women, we use them, we abuse them, and we discard them. That was the tradition then. They used to bury their daughters alive. It was a shame to literally. And there's a verse in the Quran that on the Day of Judgment, God is going to ask those girls who were buried alive for what crime they were murdered like that. So Muhammad came to liberate women literally. He gave them the right to life, the right to inheritance, the right to education, the right to own business, the right to vote, the right to choose a husband, and so on and so forth. This is unheard of 1,400 years ago. So this is a myth, you know, when you hear, oh, Islam mistreats women and all that. If you read more about it, you will come to understand why America put Islam number one and put Muhammad, peace be upon him, among the 18 or 19, you know, best lawgivers ever humanity had seen. I hope that answers the question.
So is that more of a government thing, a political thing in some countries?
Unfortunately, you know, there's the religion and there's the culture tradition. You see what I'm saying? And unfortunately, we're going back to the tradition, backward tradition, as opposed to applying the religion. Do you understand what I'm saying? And this is the battle we as imams are having with so many families. They come and say, well, this and that. We say, no, you can't do that because this is your tradition telling you. This is what you practice back home. Islam does not, for example, the female genital mutilation. You heard about that. This is not Islamic. This is cultural. Christians and Jews in Africa, North Africa, among other, you know, countries, they practice that because it's their tradition, but don't make that as part of the religion because it is not part of the religion. So that's what's happening.
Thanks so much. Let me
Sorry for taking
just very quickly. Everybody should be reminded the enormous period of Islamic emancipation, mathematics, sciences that went on for hundreds of years. It really advanced human civilization. You know, and unfortunately, there's too much of a kind of utilization for instrumental purposes of religion for all types of religion, which is pushed to the extreme now. Islam is no exception.
On that point, I'm going to invite you right now. It's still quite a ways coming, but I'm part of a steering committee. We're bringing the 1001 Inventions exhibition from England to the Detroit Science Center for 3 months. September, October, November perhaps, or something like that. So it's free of charge. We are paying on your behalf. We want to make sure that everybody goes there and see what Howard was talking about, you know, the sciences, the things, the discoveries that were made, you know, back, 1,000 years ago and so on and so forth, that really affected the whole world till this day.
I have one very quick question, and I think we have to move on. It's a complicated question, which is the issue of this moment in time. Because here you have the focal point of racism and, you know, the threat now. What do you see as the greatest threats to the institutionalization of Islamophobia now? You know, which is very frightening because we've had these moments in time when this has transpired. And my second question basically is, what do you see as the main forces that have been driving this process, and how can they be countered?
Yeah, well,
some of your talk, it's a bigger discussion, but I mean,
it is a bigger discussion. The sad part is that we have an administration that is promoting that now. This is our big challenge today. This is a government thing, if you know what I mean. I've already showed you the travel ban and how the Muslim ban became travel ban when in reality the intent was to ban Muslims from coming to America. So it's become an institutionalized Islamophobia, that is. Now, racism had been institutionalized for some time, and this is a bigger fight that we have to fight in general. We have to come together and end this. I don't know how. I don't know, you know, unfortunately, you know, after the emancipation of blacks and finally acknowledging them as full humans, whereas on record it's still 3/5 human. They have not changed that yet. I wish to see that change. As a matter of fact, or as a matter of law, I should say, we are all equal supposedly, but as a matter of fact, we know that we are not equal. And Muslims are now in this situation where it's institutionalized. And that's why, thank God to the judicial system in America, where, we can overcome that. But the problem with that is it takes such a long time. Muslims will prevail eventually in the courts and whatever. We have enough civil rights organizations. I mean, among the first ones to stand up against the so-called Muslim ban was the ACLU. And, that's a civil rights organization to protect the rights of all citizens. But luckily for that particular one, things happen very quickly. But usually, things take a long time. So with us coming together and pressing the government and saying that this is wrong and we want a change in policy and so on and so forth, I think we can do something perhaps.
I agree, and that's one of the focal points of this organization is, in fact, dealing with this issue of the protection of equality in government. So it's not used as a mechanism of pressure against any group, any religious group, any ideological group, any group of practice or race. And part of that now is focusing on a whole series of these issues in which we've organized these action circles. Let's, first of all, before I hand the mic over to Linda, let's give a big hand.
The hand is to you for being good listeners. Thank you. And asking good questions.
Well, thank you very much. And
Linda, thank you.
As with all of our
thank you for having me. Thank you, Howard, for contacting me. And thank you, sister, for recommending me. Really, Connie? Yes. Thank you.